I recently listened to one of your older videos about cryptids, and I felt compelled to share an experience that my friends and I had when we went camping. This took place back in 2017. 4 of my friends and I went camping in a spot up in the mountains. It was one of our favorite places because it was so secluded and away from people, away from the city and all the lights that it brought. I loved seeing the stars at night between the tall trees. No topper, no tent, just the bed, my sleeping bag, and that's it. We planned on being up there for a few days. The day we arrived, we set up and had a great night, but the following evening, the atmosphere seemed to shift. The air became really still, but it was different from the stillness before a storm. It was hard to explain. Even the wildlife seemed to stop existing. My friend feared that there may have been a mountain lion in the area and wanted to pack it in. Unfortunately, the rest of us weren't ready to call it quits. I gave her the keys to stay in my truck and joked that we could get away if she was right. Everyone else settled in for the night and slept in the bed of my truck again. But while I laid there trying to sleep, I couldn't shake that feeling that I was being watched. I would look into my truck to see Janet passed out. I looked over to all the tents, and my friends were nowhere to be seen, so they must have been in their tents. I scanned the trees in the area and didn't see anything or anyone. I finally told myself that I must have gotten myself worked up because of the air and my friend being worried. So I just told myself to calm down and finally fell asleep. The next morning seemed to be back to normal, so we all chalked it up to something being in the area. We were intruding on their habitat, so it was possible. But we continued to have a great day. It was once again the following night when things got a bit scary. We'd been sitting around the fire, talking and having a good time, when once again the air seemed to become still. No crickets chirping, no owl hoots, there was nothing. Nothing except a pretty pungent smell. That's when we noticed how still and quiet it was. We sat there in silence, looking around, trying to see if we could find the source of the smell or why the forest went silent, when my friend pointed out something in the trees in the distance. He said that he saw a tall figure dart across them. Jake, being who he was, wanted to go check it out. I can't blame him, as I'm the same way. But I'm a small girl, so I probably wouldn't have gone if I was alone. The other 3 stayed by the fire while Jake and I approached the trees. We didn't go far. There was a path that separated our campgrounds from the trees on the other side, but as we crossed the path, we started hearing a low guttural growl. It stopped us from going forward, not wanting to be mauled by whatever it was. We still wanted to know what it was. Did we stand a chance, or would we be better off moving or leaving? So we started shining our flashlights through the trees to find the culprit. And to this day, I wish we would have just ignored it or packed up and left. We spotted something rocking side to side between the trees. It stood about 6 feet tall and stood hunched over. Its skin, if you could call it that, was a shade of gray tightly clinging to the bones. It had small tufts of hair and random spots all over. Altogether, it just looked beyond emaciated. But the more we looked at it, the more we couldn't look away. The growling was definitely coming from whatever this thing was, but where its face should have been, it wasn't. I was following the shape of the creature with my flashlight, but I could not find eyes or a mouth anywhere on what I assumed to be its head. It made no sense. While we continued to take in the sight of this thing, it raised one arm, or leg, whatever it was, as it twitched and let out another loud growl. Except that time, it sounded like someone trying to scream with their mouth covered. Whatever it was not human, but I couldn't identify it either. All I knew was the sheer terror it instilled in me, and I yanked on Jake's arm to get the hell out of there. Thankfully, he didn't resist, and we went back to the camp where the rest of them asked what the hell that was, and were freaking out as well. I was right there with them. None of us felt comfortable staying there, so we haphazardly broke down our tents and threw everything in my truck or Caleb's. We drove back down to the entrance, and with us all being too tired and scared, we slept in the trucks in the parking lot when we could finally fall asleep. The next morning, we decided to check out the area before we left, feeling a little safer in the daylight. When we got up there, our campground looked picked over. The food items we left behind were shredded and eaten. The ground had been scratched at, as you can see the wide rake marks through the gravel, as well as spots that looked to be dug out in dirt. You could see the large individual marks like it was done with a rake or large claws. We cautiously approached the spot where we saw the creature that night. There was a small pile of something by the tree. I say something because it looked like something that was regurgitated, that included a small carcass in it. I couldn't stay long as it was making me sick, so I had to walk away. We went and told one of the rangers about a possibly sick animal up there that was potentially hostile, but he didn't seem to care much. He said that he would look into it and that was it. Given his demeanor, I didn't think that he would care about our description of the creature, or even believe us, so we just left it at that. We didn't camp there again until the next year, in spring instead of the summer. I was hoping that either the thing we saw was either dead, or maybe a different season would cause it to not be around. Thankfully, whatever the case was, we didn't see it. Part of me wishes that I would so I could try to get pictures, but part of me also thinks we got lucky getting out of there in one piece. Hello, Raven. I want to thank you again for reaching out to me to let me know about my stories. I decided that I would just sit here and go through the years in my head. It seems like the best way to remember things that have happened to me in my life. This happened back in 1977. I was a lot younger then, that's for sure. Well, I was driving back home from a band practice. Yes, I was in a band. I had been in many bands for over 50 years. Met a lot of people. I had gotten together with a couple of guys locally, and we had finished practice for the evening, and this one guy and I have to drive a little more than 30 miles to get back to town where we both lived. Back then, it was no big deal to travel 70 miles somewhere just to practice. The guy with me had been in the service, and as you recall, that was the Vietnam era when he was in. So, he was no weenie. He had seen and been through some tough stuff, but he made it home. Now, he just wanted to enjoy his life and play music. I was driving and we had gone through 2 small towns on our way to our own. About halfway between the last small town and ours is a state park. Back then, they had just made a new entrance to the park. Now, you could pull directly into the park off the highway, instead of having to go down a country road and down a long dirt road to enter the park. There was a median that separated the lanes of traffic back then, but back then, it was one that used to be raised about 5 to 6 inches. They've since done away with that raised cement, as it was probably found to be dangerous that way. Now the road is divided merely with the white lines. We were heading south, and it was around 11 at night. Slightly foggy, but you could see a quarter mile easily enough. We were just getting near the park area, and we were discussing some of the issues we were having with a certain song. Up ahead, I could see a van with those yellow fog lights on, and a car followed by another car, headed towards us. There was no one behind us. We had just started to enter the division point where the sign was, right in the middle, and the van went past. Then, I saw something running across the road behind the van. The park was on our left, right there. Whatever it was had come from the park area and run across, through the traffic, heading for the other side of the highway. It looked like it may be 4 feet tall, and was covered with black or dark brown hair that looked to be about 3 inches long. It was running on 2 legs for sure, and was going to end up right in front of my car. I swerved to the right and then pulled back left to try and miss it. It jumped back and had grabbed the dividing sign with its right arm, and the other arm went out to the side. I swear if I had had my window down and my arm out, I would have been able to slap it in the face. It was that close. We got past it, and I then yelled at my friend, "Did you see that?" He looked like he saw it better than I did. He was really rattled. All he would repeat saying was, "Keep going, keep going." I said that I wanted to turn around and see if we could find it. He kind of yelled at me, No, keep going." He would not let me turn that car around. I never saw him like that before. Now, this guy had been in the military and had seen action, so he was no chicken. I kept on our way home, and I went to drop him off at his house. He got out and went in. Didn't say goodbye, see ya, nothing. It had really upset him. I never brought it up with him after that night. I don't think he ever mentioned it to anyone. I myself only mentioned it to a couple of close friends, and, of course, they looked at me funny. My friend passed away several years ago from liver failure due to drinking heavily. So I don't have my friend, or a witness to this, anymore. And that was before I had ever heard about this stuff about Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Years later, I still often wonder if that was what we saw that night. Then, after all that time, I realized something. I thought of something that I hadn't even considered. If that was a juvenile Bigfoot, how close was Mom and Dad? These events started when I was a kid, but also as recent as 2 years ago. I grew up in a very small town. The neighborhood I lived in was the largest one in the area, and on top of the houses, we had 1 grocery store and 1 gas station. Yes, it was that small. But we did have a firehouse that had a pop machine in front of it that a lot of us kids liked to go get a drink and hang out. The firemen there were always very nice to us kids and pretty much watched over us. There were another couple of people that cared for us kids too. And that was the Hendersons that lived close to the firehouse. We had to pass their home to get there. During spring and summer, we often saw them outside doing something in their yards. Miss Henderson, I think her first name was Diane, was usually cleaning up her garden beds near her windows. Mr. Henderson, or Gary, could be found riding around on his ancient-looking lawnmower or doing something on the side of the house, where his shed was. I liked to go over there a lot as a kid. Diane made the best butterscotch cookies, and would send me home with some. Gary seemed to be a nature enthusiast. He would always point out berries and leaves that were safe to eat, gave tips on how to identify them, and even showed me how to make a strong rope out of dried vines. I loved learning so many things from him. But then I experienced death for the first time in my life. Mr. Henderson had passed away. The neighborhood felt a bit emptier and a bit quieter without his presence. But it seemed even more empty by the fact that Ms. Henderson seemed to become more reclusive and withdrawn. She was rarely out in her yard, and when I did see her, she was never smiling, and she never acknowledged me. She wouldn't look at me or wave. I remember asking my parents about it, and they explained how she was probably still hurting and then everyone coped with grief differently. But the best thing to do was to give her space. Gary was important to me, but I didn't understand death quite so well as an adult, and why she was so sad. But I took my parents' advice and stopped trying to get her attention when I passed by. But after a few months of much of the same, curiosity had gotten the best of me, and I felt sorry for her. So I made her a card in school during our free time, and I wanted to give it to her hoping that it might cheer her up. Once I got off the bus, I walked backwards towards her house and knocked on the door. No one answered. I looked through the window by the door and noticed the house looked quite messy. It was an unusual sight because when I had been over, their home was always spotless, reminding me very much of my own grandparents' house. After standing there for some time, I thought I would try the backyard, thinking maybe she was out back. I walked through the gate and called out for Miss Henderson. No answer. I walked towards her rose bushes when I saw something run past me, causing me to look over. What I saw scared me. It looked human. I didn't see fur, just pale skin. But they were also completely nude and running on all fours. When I looked over, they were just running behind the shed towards the back corner of the yard. I was pretty well freaked out being a young child, and not knowing what I saw, and probably a little embarrassed that this person was naked. I immediately ran back to the gate, still closing it, and I ran all the way home. Since my parents told me I should leave her be, I didn't tell them what I saw. I never did. I never tried to see Miss Henderson after that day. I found it hard to even look over at her home, afraid that I would see that thing again. Over time, I never heard people, including my parents, bring up the Hendersons ever again. It was like they just disappeared. Years later, my family moved out of that town and somewhere with more schooling options. And that was the summer before I would have started high school. Since we moved, I excelled in my high school, made some great friends, and really solidified what I wanted to do with my career. Honestly, the Hendersons in that town were in the past by now. But during a graduation party, a lot of us reminisced on our childhoods, and things that we missed or didn't quite understand. That's when I remembered what I experienced after Gary's passing. It stayed in the back of my mind until the party came to an end. I wanted to see my old childhood home. I asked my girlfriend if she wanted to join me, and she excitedly agreed. So we drove to my neighborhood and stopped in front of our old home. Someone lived there at the time, as there were children's toys in the yard and it had been painted a pale blue. It looked good and well taken care of. But then I was curious about the Hendersons' home. At the party, I only told my friends about them and the things they did. I told them about Gary's passing and not seeing Diane after that, but I didn't tell them about seeing someone in the backyard. We drove around the other side of the neighborhood where it bumped up against the dense trees. We parked on the side of the road next to an open field and walked through the trees. I wanted to get to the backyard. I don't know what compelled me to check out the yard instead of just the front of the house, like I did my own. We got to the woods, and I just looked over what I could see of the yards and the trees, reminiscing. Then, I heard my girlfriend gasp and grab my arm. I looked over to where her focus was, and saw something staring at us from a large pile of leaves, branches, and debris. It had to be human. But again, their skin was a pale blue or grayish color, and really leathery. There was no fur or hair, and even their heads seemed to be in patches. They were completely nude again and walking on both hands and feet. They had been watching us, until we probably startled them, and they walked to the pile to hide from us. We were both startled, but something was pulling me towards it. I slowly approached the pile, much to my girlfriend's dismay. Then, this thing jumped out from it, letting out this weird growl, but I could almost make out words. It said something like, "Get out," but it sounded warped, like someone who didn't quite know how to speak. They then took off in the other direction and hid in some of the bushes. It was evening, the sun was setting, but there was still light, and this thing was out there for anyone to see. I was pretty shaken up, my girlfriend obviously terrified. So we ran back through the trees, got in my car, and drove directly to her place. Once we got there, we sat in my car in her driveway, and she asked me what the hell we had just seen. I told her I wasn't certain, but then explained to her what I saw as a kid. She looked at me like I had something growing off my face. She first asked me if I told anyone, and then understood my reasoning. What was I supposed to say? There was a naked old person walking around their backyard like a dog? Hell, I technically shouldn't have even been back there. And now, it could be considered trespassing, and I was an adult. I didn't know what to do. The fact that she saw it too, all these years later, and actually saw it first this time, confirmed that I was not imagining it. But the worst part was that part of me feared that this thing was Miss Henderson. She'd become reclusive, and it was back there when I was a child. Could she have become feral for some reason? Did she lose Gary and then just snap? God, I didn't want to think about it, but could she have been involved with his death? If that was her, she had to be much older. They were close enough to my grandparents' age when I was a kid, and at the time of this event, I was 18. How would she be able, in her fragile body, to walk like that? And to walk that fast? Or do the things that we were witnessing? I talked to my parents about her, kind of, a couple of days later, saying that I was just thinking back on my childhood. I mentioned how she just kind of disappeared after Gary's death, and my parents basically confirmed that. They said they didn't have any kids, and they assumed that a lot of their family either lived far away or had also passed because they rarely saw anyone over there. They also said that she had pretty much disappeared. Her immediate neighbor asked around and asked for a welfare check, but when the police went in, she was nowhere to be found. But the house was spotless, with no signs of foul play. Because of this, they didn't really do any further investigation. They claimed that she probably left, or moved in with a relative, and her house sat as it was. I don't know how it ended up being sold. I finally told my parents about what I had seen, both times, and while my dad didn't say much, my mom said that she probably had dementia when I saw her as a kid, but thinks that we may have been mistaking a sick dog or something. I dropped it, as there really was no point in arguing, but I know what I saw. It was the same thing from my childhood. So now, I still think about it today, about what happened to Miss Henderson. Is it possible for someone to snap and become feral like that? What else could explain it? Could it really even be her? Or was it some other unknown creature that I saw? Sometimes I want to go back and see if I can stop it, but I can't bring myself to. I don't want to remember her like that, if that is her. And I don't want to make her into a spectacle for others. I'm really just hoping that I saw some weird creature, and not my sweet old neighbor lady. Okay, This one is a doozy. Apologies if I get things wrong grammatically, as I'm extremely paranoid at the moment. I live in the UK, Devon, with my dog. It's important to note that there's a huge expanse of woods behind the house. Early last month, this thing that looks and sounds exactly like me began to show itself directly to me. But I fear it's actually been around for much, much longer. About 4 years ago, my parents' grandmother and cousins were over at mine for a get-together. I remember my mother going to smoke around the back. Not even a minute after going out, she comes back in all flustered and asking me why I was outside in the woods. She said as I was staring at her blankly. The thing is, I wasn't. I was inside with my grandmother and my dad. My mom, bless her soul, passed it off as just seeing things. Stupidly, so did I. Cut to last year, I was in my lounge when my dog ran off into the conservatory barking like mad. This wasn't really surprising, as we do have quite a few rabbits and other vermin around the area. That was until, I kid you not, I heard my freaking voice talking in the conservatory. I checked outside. Nothing. Nothing at all. Last month, while cleaning the kitchen, I saw me outside in the woods. It looked one-to-one with me. This thing didn't move an inch. It was like a statue. I froze in place. I guess it was more the shock of seeing myself with my own 2 eyes physically. I leapt over to the conservatory door, and it was gone. In the split time it took me to go to the door, this thing was gone. Last Saturday, I was upstairs on a work assignment when I heard my freaking voice asking to be let in. My dog was going nuts and got worse when this thing was clawing and scratching at my windows and door. I contacted the police, and I'm away at my parents' house for the time being. I don't know what to tell people or if they'll even believe me. I just want this to end. Any advice? Because I'm dreading when I see this thing again. Or what it'll do. The original poster did add a second post to this, so I would like to include the information. Apologies for my lack of response to y'all's replies. I'm not that involved with online stuff, unfortunately. Thank you so much for all your replies and suggestions. I wasn't expecting such a response. I've read most of the replies on that thread and thought I would answer a few of them on this post. Feel free to ask any more questions below, as I'll get back to as many of them as I can. Number 1, mental health. I saw quite a few of y'all mention this on the last post. I don't suffer from any mental health issues. I think the most I have is a short temper, but that's besides the point. Unless I need to protect myself in the future from this thing. I'll double check though. Number 2, how do we know you're the real you, huh? Thanks for the chuckle. First one I've gotten in a while. Number 3, get some carbon monoxide monitors and set up cameras. I don't know how I didn't think to do this in the first place, but thank you for reminding me to do so. Will do. I'll double check the carbon monitors, especially as I've been experiencing migraines and generally feeling unwell recently. Cams are a go-to, so I'll get some installed. 4, maybe it's future you time traveling to the past to warn you. Well, I won't be getting any sleep tonight. Interesting thought. 5, I literally live in Devon and I'm freaking out reading this post. Whereabouts are you? As I said on the last post, I'm currently at my parents' in Exeter, but I live just outside Totnes. Number 6, was it clothed? Was it wearing my clothes? Yes. I have a flannel shirt that I wear often, and it was wearing that. I'll ask my mother if it was also wearing the shirt when she saw it. 7, is this fiction? Believe me, I wish. As I said, I'll get some cameras up and running to capture this thing next time it decides to show up. As I said, please ask any more questions that I missed here and I'll get back. Thank you all again. For context, this happened just last night, and is among other things going on. My grandmother lives by herself in a little double-wide. Out back there is a big backyard, a huge field that a neighbor farms, and woods behind that. I've always gotten the sensation something was out in those fields, older than the land, almost a part of the land. Last night she fell and dislocated her shoulder. My parents took her to the ER and I volunteered to keep watch overnight with her. As soon as I stepped foot into that house, I felt a pressure and an unclean feeling come over me. All through the night my skin was crawling and I just felt unclean, like something was in the house with us. This morning I came back home and my mom told me something that has me coming here for answers. She said that when she was helping my grandma out of the car that night, she saw something walk through the backyard. She said the best word she could use to describe it was werewolf. She said it was tall, gangly, and on all fours with eye shine. She's also felt the unclean feeling. I know a little bit about skinwalkers, and what she described sounded a lot like one. I also study the paranormal, so I'm also of a negative spirit as the culprit. If it is a skinwalker, would Catholic prayers and blessings work? Or would I need something else? So that, my friends, was a Cryptid Stories collection, complete with a potential feral human story, which is a rarity, but absolutely terrifying. Creepy. Scary. Cryptids. Cryptids are interesting. Cryptids are always an interesting topic to do stories on, because you never know what you're going to get in these stories. Sometimes it's your classic Wendigo-style story. Sometimes you get Jersey Devil stories. Sometimes you get these feral human stories. Rarely, but sometimes. But you know what's always a common denominator in these stories? Being outside. People never see cryptids sitting in their basement talking into a microphone, reading stories from Reddit or in their emails from subscribers. Never. Never. I've been sitting down here for almost 4 years straight. That's a lie. I've been sitting down here for a while. I've never seen a cryptid down here. You know why? My basement's cryptid-proof. You know why it's cryptid-proof? Because it's concrete. I really actually don't have, that bit was going too far, and I didn't know what I was going to say, so it just didn't work out. Anyways, hopefully you all enjoyed these terrifying cryptid stories. If you did, please consider hitting that thumbs up button, as it does help a lot. If you are new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider hitting that subscribe button, as it does help a lot. Also, if you look down at the bottom of the video and you're on computer, PC, maybe mobile, I don't know, but on PC, whenever I say subscribe, it should light up that button. I saw that the other day. I was watching a video and they said subscribe, and the button, popped. It was so cool. It was like, wow, YouTube, that's a pointless design thing. How about you fix your copyright system? But anyways, yeah, just like the video, subscribe, and if you're feeling bold, go down below the video and leave me a comment letting me know your thoughts, how you're doing, how your day's going. If you've ever seen a cryptid and you want to submit the story to me, go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. That also helps, keeps the content going. Yeah. All that said, friends, hope you're having a beautiful day. Hope I do see you again here very soon. But until then, remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important. You are the best you that you can be. Do not forget it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And until I see you again, much love, and of course, sleep well.